Is Marc, and I work for the Peace Data Association. I'm lucky to be surrounded by 3 for now, but soon 4 amazing people to talk about mass adoption, what it means, and of course, Solana. Before getting into it, I'd like to thank everyone already listening in. This is the first Peace Data-driven conference. Thank you very much, guys. As I said, 3 people for now. Who are they? Let me quickly present them to you. I'll be short and brief, and I'll let you each one edit on the description and one addition if you'd like. So Nick, you lead institutional growth at Solana Foundation, meaning you're responsible for digital assets, not crypto, let's say here, and permission environments such as PythNet, let's say. And I've read online that you're a wine lover, so we're at least 2 on the panel.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
Mert, perfect, just in time. Co-founder of Helius, Solana most loved RPC nodes, APIs, all the dev tooling, and also the most vocal founder online, might be known as the Solana ratioer. Mert, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me, and stoked to chat about some Solana.
Perfect. Tristan, co-founder of Backpack. Backpack includes newly launched crypto exchange, the multi-chain wallet everyone loves, Mad Labs NFTs, of course, big surf enjoyer also. Thanks for coming on, Tristan.
Thanks for having me. Good to be on a panel with a bunch of friends.
And finally, Mike, currently CEO of Douro Labs, longtime contributor to the Pyth network, traditional finance as a background, SIBO jump trading as the marquee names, and also a surfer enjoyer.
Yeah, 2 surf enjoyers and 2 wine enjoyers here. Excited to be on this and humbled to be around such smart people.
Thanks, guys. To get on the right foot first, I'd love to hear from at least one of you your definition of mass adoption. We see it everywhere. How do you define it? And I'd like to hear from Nick first on this. What is mass adoption for you?
Sure. So to me, mass adoption is ubiquitous use of the blockchain globally. So that probably is hundreds of millions of active users. On Solana today, we have about 1 million monthly fee payers. So we're still a couple of orders of magnitude away from ubiquitous mass adoption, but I think it will happen much faster than many people think. And I think it will be equally driven by B2B as it will be B2C.
Amazing. Anyone wants to add this? Tristan, you're more, let's say, B2C. How do you see mass adoption?
Yeah, I think it's always a tricky question because in my mind, I'm not sure if mass adoption means getting this technology into every single person's hand in the world like we have with the iPhone, or if it means more so creating sort of tailored solutions for the right groups of people, and that qualifies as mass adoption. I think something I'd love to see as a first step in that direction are all of these tens, hundreds of millions of folks in crypto that have only ever used a crypto exchange as far as their interaction with cryptocurrency or blockchains, and start getting them to actually enter the on-chain world and using some of the awesome things that are being built.
Amazing. Now that we have a general idea of what it is, Mert, I feel you're the best suited for this question. From purely Solana perspective, what are the specific projects or innovation that are actually helping us moving towards this mass adoption?
Yeah, certainly. So I think actually a perfect example is Helium, who just launched a $20 phone plan yesterday. There's talking about mass adoption. Obviously, everybody has a phone and everybody needs access to the internet. And on Solana, you can have a team like Helium who can represent their tokens and hotspots and whatever else they want to represent on chain on Solana. And that is, so I actually think DePIN and mobile networks and Hive mappers and other cases of this as well, and render network are by far the coolest and most interesting applications of crypto and have the most long-term potential. And so, you know, they rolled out a $5 plan in Miami, I believe, a few months ago, and that was a big hit. And so the thing about mass adoption there is like, you don't even, just like how you don't really know that you're using like a certificate for like your SSL connections on the internet, you don't necessarily need to know that you're using crypto for it to be mass adoption. It just needs to be adopted by the masses of people, but it's not necessarily clear that if it's supposed to be abstracted or not abstracted. And so in this case, it is abstracted, and it's a very natural application. And then, you know, of course, there's also the payment side of this, right? So we all saw Visa expand to Solana using USDC settlements for cross-border facilitations. I think that's just going to be one of first of many, right? There's going to be other payments providers who want to come on chain, and you know, I mean, payments is really the killer use case of crypto, or at least the first killer use case of crypto. And so I think Solana specifically, with predictable fees and you know, bounded fee markets, let's say, such that fee spikes in one state doesn't affect the other state, parallelization, and most importantly, in my view, and probably the most under talked about aspect, is elasticity in how it handles load. So for example, if you see a mass surge in users, on other chains you're kind of out of options. Like you kind of need to do some roadmap shuffling. On Solana, you can kind of just add new cores to the validators, and then you'll actually be able to scale. And so when you put all those together, you kind of have a pretty interesting environment for actually being able to handle mass adoption in probably the first instance of this that we've seen. Like, I think before this, it was actually the case that you just could not handle mass adoption, but now I think there's really nothing holding us back.
And I think you very much nailed it on mass adoption is not just everyone using something knowing or using it willingly. So do you think within the crypto sphere, we'll have various kind of life cycle of mass adoption, like TradFi, DeFi, then you have the whole GameFi. You just mentioned Deepin, Mert. Tristan, you're both on the centralized exchange side, NFT. Do you think mass adoption is kind of linked all together in crypto, or it's going to be very kind of fragmented?
So my view is actually that further adoption of crypto will continue on the financial side before hitting on anything else. I see stable coins as probably the most ubiquitous use of cryptocurrency at a general scale worldwide. So just to give an example, if you go to Nigeria or if you go to Argentina, every single person there actually has a pretty good sense of what crypto is, not because they really care that much perhaps about the technology, but because it's the easiest way for them to get in their local currency directly into dollars as fast as possible, perhaps Bitcoin for the more risk adverse or Solana or whatnot. So I think stablecoins are the first thing that are getting into sort of mass consciousness in countries where it really matters for them. Then I also think that we're starting to see an environment worldwide where Bitcoin does actually look like a feasible option to some degree to people, just purely from a financial perspective, purely from a, let's say, macro hedge of the different things occurring in the world. And my sense is that the growth that will drive for the crypto markets in general will also provide the funding for some of these folks building really creative solutions like the Deepin companies that Mert was describing. And it'll give them the growth and it'll give them the capital that will allow them to perhaps take these things to the next level. So I think it's gonna continue as it has been as this financial vehicle, and then over time, if we get it to the right point, that could then cascade enough liquidity into the teams that are doing interesting enough things that could then bring to usage where folks are actually using the blockchain perhaps without even knowing it, beyond any financial reason.
Mike, do you agree on first DeFi, then the rest, or actually maybe it's a great GameFi that would just bring the actual billion?
Yeah, I love the way you guys have framed it. So basically there's like the kind of the visible cutting edge, and then there's these orthogonal ways with which we may get mass adoption that most people would not have predicted. The one thing that I thought was really great about Mert's answer was the fact that he didn't even mention on-chain derivatives, which is like one of the more obvious things because there's so many other great things that are happening. So I definitely agree with your framing, Marc, where you said, is it possible that these are going to have different cycles and kind of tribes that get brought on, and it'll be like crypto blockchains solving particular niches, and then that can lead to an entire community of people joining with or without knowledge. The one that I think is the most obvious is, kind of crypto trading, centralized exchanges. They have the scale of numbers where you could consider it somewhat mass adoption, right? The holders of crypto tokens, has probably big enough numbers where you could say that it's in the kind of the common like mind share. So if you can start to get some of that done on chain, right now we're at like sub 1% of the volumes of Binance futures on chain. If you can start to see something like over 10%, that's a really nice indicator that we've got one segment already kind of figured out. And that's the one I'm predicting to happen the first. Although the stuff that's happening on DeFi, I think is really amazing, and it's always, it never goes away. So every kind of cycle, there's so much more available, right? The coverage improves, the prices become much more professional. So I think that one is really, really exciting. But the same thing you could say for some of the DeFi stuff, the way that we're starting to see the abstraction away from on-chain derivatives looking like more and more like centralized exchanges is really exciting to me. I think that people will have more options. They'll still be able to use centralized exchanges. There'll be obviously a space in an area for them, but you just start to see more people that actually have the option to use decentralized exchanges, whereas today it's probably somewhere around the million or less people.
And from your day-to-day experience and work, Nick, at the Solana Foundation, focused, I would imagine, very much towards institutions and onboarding them. Do you very much feel DeFi, then it's like overboard?
Well, I mean, I think there's so many exciting, innovative use cases of the blockchain that will drive mass adoption. There are more mundane but incredibly elegant solutions like Sling, which is kind of like Venmo, but cross-border, free and frictionless, leveraging USDC on Solana. I think very similar to how Visa and others are thinking about what the world might look like in the future. Sling is already doing today, and if you haven't tried it, it's just remarkably easy to use. And then there are more kind of creative new models that weren't previously possible without something like Solana, like Drip House, which leverages compressed NFTs to enable an entirely new form and format of mass content distribution. So I think, of course, payments, DeFi, NFTs, gaming, there'll be innovations across these categories. And we're starting to see those come to light today.
And regardless of I'm quite interested to hear on a per specific environment, what do you think are going to be the biggest roadblocks to arrive at this mass adoption stage? Whether on the deep end, is it just, let's say, Helium getting more and more successful with their newly launched plan? Is it just time? People get used to new technology, new application? Keen to hear, let's kick it back to Mike, focused maybe more on the data side, like throughout your Pyth experience, so having usually private companies sharing proprietary data, how do you come up from kind of adopting the blockchain and just contributing data elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, there are some elements to Pyth that look like DePIN. DePIN is obviously vast, and your experience level to enter is quite low. I mean, for Helium Network, you just need to have, the broadcaster, or the antenna, and an internet connection. For Hive Mapper, you just need to have a camera, and you can contribute to the network. Pyth has sort of done the same thing. It's taking on a centralized industry that has, for a long time, not had a lot of competitors. And that's like the exchanges with regards to financial market data, incentivizing a new set of participants, but they have to have very high level of expertise or access. And this is the trading firms and exchanges, and convincing them to participate in a protocol that leads to a solution that people can use. So there are certainly all those elements there. Now, the table stakes for DePIN and table stakes for Pyth are similar. It needs to be done on a blockchain. It needs to be able to be, you need to be able to convince people that there's no preferential access to anyone. trading firms are highly suspicious of one another. And the first couple in were very nervous that someone would have preferential access. It took a while for them to understand that nobody does. That using a public blockchain, using a block explorer are the ways that you can convince people that this is a fair and just system. So I think that those sorts of tools will become more common. You'd never been able to, just like in DePIN, you can't go out and sign everyone up to an LLC that wants to participate in like the Helium market. You would never be able to get all these trading firms exchanges to sign up to the Pyth network. You need to do this in a way where it can be global. It can have checks and balances, some control measures in place, but it can really scale. And I think that those are really only enabled. So when you start to think about other products that can do the same thing, I think that the design space is very exciting. And obviously we're focused on doing this with types of data. Financial data is our core bread and butter at Pyth. But there's no reason why this couldn't be done with other types of data that people hold proprietary, so long as the incentive mechanism is sufficient to reward them appropriately for it.
Cool. And Mert, for example, with Solana Tech today, do you think we are like, is the roadblock already behind us? The technical roadblock of finding something that the world can use, or we still have way to go?
Yeah, so I probably have somewhat of an unpopular opinion on this. And that is to say, so maybe like if you talk to some of the Web2 guys or some of the old web proponents, they'll say something like, well, crypto has been around for a while, we're not early anymore, and the use cases, except for payments and stuff, just aren't there. And basically what I would probably say is, while crypto itself has been around for a while due to like Bitcoin and the early iterations of Ethereum, scalable, efficient, and fast blockchains or smart contract platforms have not been around until Solana, in my view, okay, with predictable fees. And so that's actually quite new. And what that means is that the roadblock isn't necessarily a technical one, certainly not on Solana, but it's actually more of a product question. Like, it's always quite difficult to go 0 to 1, right? Like, blockchains are not really, and we try to make analogies to like, oh, they're countries or they're cloud platforms or, they're the new internet. It's like, okay, they're kind of some portion of each of those things, but they're not really any of those things in totality. And so the design space is so novel that it really takes like a special product mind to build something interesting on top of that and find mass adoption. So I think like Nick mentioned it with Drip, right? So like when NFTs first started, as an example, it was very much based on the fact that, okay, people like scarce things that are in limited supply and maybe they want to bid for it and drive the price up. But then Vib from Drip was like, actually, no, there's this thing called compression. We're just going to treat NFTs as content and make them abundant, right? So that's just the last year. And so basically what I'm trying to say there is the roadblock isn't technical anymore. It is, one, education and spreading the message that, okay, there is this thing called Solana that you can build things on that will scale and where you won't run into the outdated notions of like blockchains are just inefficient, expensive, and whatnot. That's number one. And then number two, once people are aware of that, it's like, okay, you have this blank canvas, which is exciting in the sense that you have a lot of freedom. But when you have a lot of freedom, it's also quite difficult to come up with new things, ironically, because you don't have anything to go off of that has worked that well, right? And so that leads to some innovation cycles that are, I think, long-winded. And so I think that's just gonna have to play out. But then there's some, obvious things like DeFi and payments and DePIN that take existing mechanisms that exist in the world and just make them more efficient and accessible and fair. And so I think, but okay, the short answer is that certainly technical roadblocks are not the main challenge anymore. I think it's more of a product and awareness issue at this point.
Can I add on that, Marc? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nick. Why don't you?
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to underscore. I think that Mert hit such a good point. It's almost like the hype cycle or the innovation cycle. And there's like a common misconception that when you look back at different technological advances, they tend to be glorified as like overnight success, but in reality, they actually were grinding for like, dozens of years. For instance, everything from, the airplane, electricity, railroads, these took decades before there was any sort of meaningful mass adoption. Decades of experimentation, of failure, of cycles of boom and bust, of new companies coming in, and then they finally happened. And then it's very easy to look back and just take the narrative like, oh, Thomas Edison has the light bulb, and before you know it, there's this, because people have a very difficult time of conceptualizing time space. And it's always like the current cycle that you're in is always just grinding forever. The internet was another example. The internet technology was developed, decades before, and it really just took a very long time from the late 90s before there was any semblance of even medium to then eventually mass adoption. So what always happens is that the end of the cycle is exponential, and everything before it gets exponential, you have no idea when it's going to take off. So we're all sort of just figuring out like, when is this thing going to take off? Preparing it so that there's the best possibility for it to do so. We all sort of know it does. Like, it's always happened with technology that tends to find continuous use cases, and crypto has always found continuous use cases every cycle. It doesn't go away. People building pairs, the number of users that become more aware of it continuously increases. The number of people working at companies continuously increases. So all those indicators that we're not sitting on something that will go away gives us the confidence to be able to say, all right, well, we know this will go exponential. We know there'll be mass adoption. It's not a matter of whether or not this will happen. It's just a matter of when it will happen. And if it's not this particular cycle, then it's because we weren't ready for it, because either the technology wasn't as good as we had thought, or it was because we just weren't ready from even like the companies being protective of their monopolies and putting moats around it, or regulation, something like that. Now I'm optimistic. I think that it feels like technology-wise, we're there. When I look at the statistics around your trading experience on a decentralized derivatives platform, it looks very similar to what you get on a centralized exchange. Like, the fees are close, round trip times are very close. So the things that are probably holding that back are a little bit more on like the front end and making the user experience a little bit more abstracted. And then there's other examples like like DePIN, where it just feels like there's much more advancement versus what we had sort of 2-3 years ago.
Nick, do you agree when interfacing with companies, whether they want their own private kind of Solana environment or just want to get involved, leverage the blockchain, all their concerns more, let's say, on the maybe regulation, legal side rather than the tech?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are 3 areas that need to continue to improve to reach mass adoption. One, as Mert and Mike said, is UX. And I think this is why I referenced something like Sling. Like, you can, the blockchain doesn't necessarily need to make something more complex in terms of usability. I think just given how technical the blockchain is, some of the early developers kind of came at it more from that lens versus more of a product and usability lens. But now I think you're seeing more and more really elegant, really easy to use examples of dApps. And some of these are even coming from institutions like Franklin Templeton and Wisdom Tree have products, retail products in the market where you're using blockchain to custody digital assets, and you may not even necessarily as a user be aware of that. There's also regulation, which the United States is just sadly lagging far behind other places of the world. And I think that's quite distressing for those of us here in the United States. One of the reasons that so much value accrued to the United States over the last 30 years was because we were early adopters and embraced the internet and created standards around that. and sandboxes for folks to innovate. Silicon Valley, of course, being known the world over for being the place where so much of that innovation happened. And I personally would love to see more of that innovation happening here in the United States. But I still am excited that there are other folks out there like Singapore and in Europe that are creating these sandboxes for innovation to happen with respect to regulated activity. And then the third thing is security. I mean, this is still a really big problem. We need to make it easier to use the blockchain with respect to some of the virtues of decentralization and autonomy. So allowing for self-custody, key management hacks, making it easier for individual users, whether they be institutional or retail. And by the way, this is just as important for institutional users. In many cases, auditors require institutions use centralized exchanges for easier auditability and redundancy and security, when of course that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense when you look at like where a lot of these hacks have happened and taken place. And so until that gets easier and better and more resilient, we're probably not going to yet see us get to 1 billion users of blockchain.
Cool. All of you mentioned already kind of different like segment, payment, deep in. Would there be, and I would love to hear one from each one of you, at least one like industry or type of product that hasn't been tried like from the blockchain perspective. Like Helium, mobile network on a blockchain sounds weird at the beginning. Is there like few environment, whether it's, I don't know, and this is usually the meme, healthcare, supply chain, do you have a precise idea of one thing you think we haven't tried yet, definitely worth to try, and would be a success? Tristan, I don't know if you have an idea
Yeah,
already.
so this is definitely the idealistic optimist within me, but I think public spending recorded on a blockchain would be a really interesting model to have transparency into how public capital is being used. It could start really small. It could start with a city council. It could start with experiments and then see if it's possible to scale. I think there's just so much corruption in government around the world, and it's such a shame because this money could be transparent to some degree. I mean, I understand there are obvious considerations there that make it hard. Contractors don't want to say how much their quotes are for the different projects that they're doing and so on and so forth, but I still think that there is a pathway there somehow. So that's one thing that I think is pretty exciting if we get there at some point in time.
I have another optimistic one that has similar, I guess, direction in terms of aspirations, but it's around pharmaceutical and testing. I think that there's these monopolies are just so big within pharma. If you could open up and decentralize the testing and the test sets, like all this years and years of built up assets around testing, which has created this myth that the pharmaceutical companies need to have all these grants and they have to, lose so much money on research for so long that they deserve to make all these windfalls. The windfalls are just gigantic. And so you don't ever have competitors in the pharma space, and so you, as a result, don't get lots of competition. So I think there'd be something really interesting that you could do to decentralize this as well, and have like independent laboratories that could do some small parts of pharmaceutical testing that gets contributed to a decentralized protocol, and either has explicit incentives for people to do so and allows them to share data, or does so in a way where they can kind of specifically make it available to certain parties. But that's one area where I would love to see some innovation.
Sorry, not to hog the mic. One other really, really good one that I think is going to happen no matter what is that we're gonna have to use some type of cryptographic proof on every piece of media uploaded online to prove that you are the person uploading it. Because I actually think people underestimate we already can't believe any piece of media that we see on the internet. I think we know that as a general rule now. And I think that's only going to increase with time, and people are going to want to have to, or they're going to want to stamp what they're putting out into the world. And I think crypto and blockchains are actually really good for that.
Yeah, and I would build on that. Identity to me is the thing that is going to really unlock just so many more opportunities for people around the world with respect to participatory governance, participatory profitability, participatory privacy. And you know, we're barely scratching the surface on this.
I can kind of take a shot at this. So, I mean, I'm not going to mention Deepin again, but certainly there's a lot of Deepin ideas that haven't been tried, and I think there's a massive design space there. Like something I want to do is actually a Deepin network for data centers, because data centers are kind of like isolated and there's not too many of them. And I think you should actually be able to do that with Deepin. And there's a lot of stuff there, like energy panels and charging stations and whatnot. And then probably like the most obvious one that we just haven't done is like voting, right? It's once you kind of have Sybil resistance, it just seems very obvious that voting should be on chain. And obviously that the hurdle there is regulatory more than anything. But like you could even try wild stuff like just uploading your local municipality's governance on chain and seeing if that gets people more involved. Because I think like one of the biggest problems in governance, not just in crypto, but just in governance throughout history, is just the lack of participation, right? And one of my beliefs is that crypto is like, people don't think of it this way, but I think like crypto is like one of the first times in history where you have so many young people and smart, like technical people are actually getting involved with governance and politics and that entire kind of environment, where before they were just like, no, I'm not going to vote, right? I'm not going to vote. This is not going to affect anything. So I think that's like under talked about or underrated, but it could be quite interesting in a few years.
And again, I'll love to hear maybe from Tristan and Mert, because you've been like, let's say for the past 2 years, and apologies if it's more, like constantly be at the forefront of shipping new things and like trying out, and overall somehow at our level reach mass adoption, like the mass being what it is today, but through your mad lads Tristan, and I feel through Helius now, Solana community has never been like more interested in technical topics, and is like one of the brightest, I feel. Like how did you become that successful? Like what do you think make you that successful? What's the key parameter in reaching mass adoption?
So we certainly haven't gotten there on the product side yet. I think the Mad Lads are quite the success so far. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And I think for us, it's a little bit of this conundrum, which is that it seems that if you want to be successful in crypto, you obviously have to target the crypto users, because they are the ones that will and know how to use your products. So you have this initial demographic that you go after, which actually the majority of them are on Twitter, which makes it easier because you can just talk to one place and the majority of these people will see what you're doing. And so if you're really good at that, you can really get this first segment of folks who are the people who actually pay attention every day and are seeing what's happening and then are actually using your products. But what we're trying to figure out now, and what we're working on with different strategies like the roster, is how do you get outside of that bubble? And I think there's one approach which we saw during the last bull market, which is just like enormous sponsorships and arenas and celebrity endorsements. But I think that works to some degree, especially if the market environment's really hot and people are really interested in the speculative nature, and now they have a sort of an excuse to get in because, oh, that person that I love is repping this company, and so I'm gonna do it too. Like that, this makes it okay for me. But I also think that we need to figure out a more sustainable approach that brings people in, not just because of this positive association with an icon or thing that they have, but because they actually think what we're doing is cool. I think that's going to take time. I don't think that's going to be where the next large waves of new users come into the space. I actually think that speculation will continue to be the largest adherent of bringing new people into crypto. And I think it's also a symptom of what the world looks like now, where, as you guys have probably seen in many different parts of the world, it's really hard for younger people to follow the established footsteps that we've set up as a society, in the sense of you go to school, you get out, you get a good job, you go and you get a wife and you have kids and you can afford your home, and everything's kind of nice and dandy. That's becoming less and less of a reality for a lot of the world. And I think, although a bit sad to say, people are just going to gamble more, in the sense of, and when I say gamble, I don't mean a casino necessarily, but I mean actually going and looking at crypto and being like, okay, this is a chance for me to grow my capital, even though it's riskier. And I think that's where a lot of the inflows are going to be into crypto in the first place. And then I think when those people come in with the speculative nature, they're able to be, let's say, evangelized into the more valuable blockchain aspects that could actually improve their lives from a technology perspective. I mean, I think for me, it was a little bit the same thing. In 2017, I got into the space. I made some money in that first bull run, and seeing that capital increase for myself is what really made me dive deeper than I ever had into anything else. So I think that cycle will probably repeat. That's not to say that we aren't trying to do things that create mass consumer awareness. So the roster is a good example of that, where we want to do things that, even if these folks aren't going to come in and use our products immediately, they have a brand association, a brand affinity with us. They have an understanding that this company exists, and they may actually think that company is cool. So that when the time comes that these folks actually want to come in and try these products and use the blockchain and trade these tokens, they already have a starting point. And ideally, that starting point is us, for them to come in. And with the product suite that we have, we can walk them through the whole user journey, from having fiat, bringing that fiat onto an exchange, buying gas tokens, putting the gas tokens in the non-custodial wallet, and then here, let us show you the world of decentralized applications. So I'm really excited, because I think we're one of the few companies that can actually walk the user through every step of that journey. And that's what we're going to try and figure out as well when more people come into the space.
Can I add something to that? Just kind of taking the other end of the demographic spectrum. So he's talking about younger, new participants in the space. I think we're also about to see Gen X and boomers enter the space, and that, you know, might be thanks to things like the Bitcoin ETF product that, you know, is widely discussed about potentially coming as soon as mid-January. And it's less speculation for Gen X and boomers and more about diversification. And so, you know, if the Bitcoin ETF and other products, Ethereum, maybe Sol, whatever, you know, become available to Gen X and boomers, which hold the vast majority of global wealth today, that will, of course, you know, be a big instigator for just more interest in the blockchain overall, because as we've seen in all the prior cycles, like, the price movement does lead to just more interest in the underlying technology. You know, as much as we want to talk about like price go up or whatever, and the good and bad about that, it does typically lead to more interest and awareness of the underlying blockchain technology, which of course enables more innovation and venture investment and other investment and awareness of the category. And then the other thing is, on the institutional side, Project Guardian, which was recently announced out of Singapore, they're using the blockchain with folks like JP Morgan, Apollo, Wisdom Tree, to use the blockchain to both provide access to private fund products as well as diversify across them. So again, these are very boring, you know, kind of use cases, but may also lead to Gen X and boomers bringing more capital and awareness and interest in usage of the blockchain as well.
Can I also add one point here? I actually think that the crypto markets, I agree with both of you on like the attraction of different segments of the investing space. But I think that the crypto markets in general are a correction to the stock markets basically becoming way less exciting and interesting over the last 20 years. So if you remember, like in the 90s, you basically had something that looked a lot like crypto. Like you had Pets.com, Amazon, all these very early stage companies that IPO'd, and people could speculate on them, highly risky, of course. And some of them were able to pick big winners and be really successful. And then, you know, some of them picked some losers, and there was this big collapse. And then in 2000, well, I guess it was shortly after the collapse, they changed the rules. So we didn't have other bubbles for a while. We had this Sarbanes-Oxley rule that came in place. Basically said, if you want to become a public company, your legal obligation becomes so high and the cost becomes super, super expensive. So what happened? All of that creation moved into the private markets, all went to venture capital. And they basically made all the money in the early stage part of the speculation of companies. And by the time all these companies IPO'd, it was sort of a done deal, right? It was like, by the time Robinhood IPO'd, it's like, it's already a sure thing. It's a company, it's got big revenues. There was no more room for growth stocks to come out. And I think that was a bad thing for the investing public. They couldn't speculate on this. And I think that the crypto markets is a appropriate reaction to allow people to participate in something when it's still in an experimentary phase, all the way up to things that are more mature in their protocols. But people can determine for themselves what level of risk they want to put on, and they can do research. And I think that it's a great thing to have. So I totally agree. From an investing perspective for people, there are certain attributes to these markets that will probably fit into a future society.
All right, I'll go next. I will take the. I think everybody's mentioned something relatively financial. I'll take like the total other side of that, to no surprise. So I come at this more from like a tech accelerationism point of view almost. Like the entire point why we started Helius was to accelerate the adoption of crypto. Like that's literally our mission if you look at our Notion page. And the moment that led to that was, well, I used to try and build stuff on Solana on my own as a developer. And it was like, okay, it's just way too difficult to build applications right now in Solana. And this is actually something quite common in software, which is if you have like a very performant system, it's generally harder to use, right? Like assembly, Rust, C++, those are all harder things to grok, as opposed to something like Python or JavaScript, which is super easy, but maybe not as performant. And so then the idea is like, okay, how do we make the most performant blockchain also the easiest to build on? And if you then combine those things, you give a huge design space to developers. And my belief is that nerds experimenting with cool stuff is how you get new tech that ends up improving the lives of everybody. Like for example, even in mobile phones, there wasn't much activity and innovation before the App Store, right? Before you give these developers a canvas where they can deploy new stuff with these new tools. Same with operating systems. So, my approach, and I wouldn't say we're successful so far, not even close, but the way I talk about it is like we need to enable, educate, and inspire developers. And once you do that, then it's a numbers game, right? It's like a stochastic process. If you have enough of those developers, some of them will build great companies and great products that we can't even think of. And so that's like my singular focus and the singular focus of Helius.
And amazing answer, and I love this one. And building on it, what would be, and I'll hopefully get it from each of you for your own kind of endeavor. For you, Mert and Helius, at what point will you be like, we've succeeded? Helius, we've reached a point where almost you can sit down, take a sip, and enjoy. We've delivered something amazing. Like, is it a number of developers? Is it more blockchain developers than Web2 developers? What is your tipping point?
Yeah, so things like that are always pretty hard to quantify because numbers are always dynamic and circumstantial. But in terms of qualitative measuring sticks, let's say, my number one desire would be like, if you as a developer have an idea in your head and you can put it in the hands of somebody through executing on it ASAP, right? That cycle from idea to product, if that's as optimized as humanly possible, such that, let's say you're Tolly, right? You had 2 coffees and a beer and you're like, I'm just gonna ship something. And you actually can, because you're not bogged down by the lack of documentation or the lack of tooling or your RPCs like rugging you and whatnot. Then it's like, okay, we're at least on the path to success. And maybe we, like 3 to 4 companies or whatever X is there, are able to consistently do that over a long period of time, then I'm going to say, okay, we're probably doing okay. At which point, we would never stop, because we do have a very interesting addiction to stress and pain. So we would keep trying to build new stuff. But I would say like that is the first thing that we want to accomplish, right? Like if you're some, FANG engineer at Google and you're like, I'm done with this. I don't want to change the buttons on Gmail anymore. I have an idea. I'm going to build it. I'm going to go on Solana. Oh, look, there's Helius. I can use it. Boom. I just got to measure funding, right? Like that's kind of what I want.
And that's a great objective. Mike, you want to go? What is kind of your, in relation to Pyth? We've reached kind of critical mass, and everything gets better just by the system.
Yeah, I mean, my end goal, like the compass for the moment, is I'd like to have all the world's financial data flow through Pyth in a way that all the world's music flows through Spotify. I think that's like a good North Star. In the intermediate step, I think that having every type of institution represented as suppliers in the Pyth network. We've got pretty much every trading firm. We've got a lot of the exchanges. Seeing that cover banks, asset managers would be an amazing next step, because once you break into those categories, it's a matter of scaling, and the scaling, as we've already seen, happens pretty quickly. So I would say as like a end goal, it's the kind of Spotify analogy. As an intermediate step, I'd love to see that supply really expand.
Amazing, thank you. Tristan, what can we wish for Backpack?
Yeah, this is such a hard question, because as Mert put it, if you hit these things, you keep pushing harder than ever, because it means you can hit the next thing. So it's I don't know if there's like a number you can give from like, hey, I'm gonna go touch grass. Yeah, funny story. Armani was saying, once we hit 100K followers on Twitter, he'll actually go outside for once with me and go for a walk. And now that we have over 100K combined between the Mad Lads and the Backpack Twitter, he's like, no. Now it has to be 100K on each before I do it. So it's like the treadmill continues. But I think if I had to just give some numbers, $1 billion of daily volume on the exchange, several 100,000 active users on the wallet, and Mad Lads being the dominant collection across all blockchains would be a place where I'd feel perhaps we've moved past being a spunky little startup. Because right now people are like, oh, you guys are so successful and like this is so amazing and this and that. And it's like, yeah, we have an amazing community with the Mad Lads who are rock stars, and they really kick ass, and we love and appreciate them. But there's still so much to do on the product side, and so much work to do there. So we still feel like we're a scrappy little startup trying to make it happen.
Amazing. And Nick, what could we wish for Solana? And good chance we actually wish it too on our end.
So our job is to support folks like Mike, Mert, and Tristan, and everyone else building on Solana. And if we do our job, we cede more and more and more to the ecosystem and community, and have less and less and less responsibility at the foundation. So if we're successful, all of us at the foundation are out of a job, and Tristan, Mert, Mike, and others are the ones continuing to carry the torch for Solana.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. We're close to the end, 10 minutes. I don't know if you have any, let's not call them closing remarks, but if you want to leave on a note, I'll give you the mic. Other than that, otherwise, we'll give a little breather before our next panel, which will be focused on investing in the future, especially Web3. So guys, if you want, Nick, Tristan, Mert, one word of encouragement for Solana builders, Solana users, anything?
Yeah, I would say this industry is by far the most accessible industry in the world. If you're hungry and you really care about it, you can almost guaranteed get a job somewhere. That doesn't mean you get a glamorous job at the start, but you can go show up in a Discord and provide a ton of value and help a company, and over time very likely end up with a role at that company. I think it's understated how non-systemic crypto is in that regard, how prior qualifications cease to matter in the face of current work. So my encouragement would be to anyone that loves this industry, is excited by it, give it a shot. There's actually a really strong opportunity here for anyone that's hungry and wants to make something happen.
I would add, and you know, I say this on Twitter all the time, so it's probably redundant, but like, stop thinking that you have time is kind of how I would put it. Not to be depressing, but cultivate a sense of urgency, right? Like just do the thing, just build, just start. You'll get stuck, that's fine, just do the thing anyways. My DMs are open. Happy to help, but you know, you don't have to be an engineer, you don't have to be a technical person. You can just start writing stuff, do research, do data analysis, recruit people, tell the story, intro people, I don't know, just throw out some product ideas, but basically just cultivate a sense of urgency and amp it up. That's what I would advise.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. Had a great time. Coming up next is going to be panel with amazing brains too. Nick Carter, we'll have Multicoin, DeFi Digital, Borderless, Wintermute. It's going to be a very nice one. Nick, Tristan, Mert, Mike, that just came back. Thanks again for the time. Much appreciate having you spend time at the Pyth Data Driven conference. Hope to see you soon, real life, and back again next year.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Megan.